and welcome to the DSR Daily. I'm David Rothkopf, and I'm joined by Riley Fessler. Good morning, Riley. How are you?
Good.
Excellent. And also, of course, Minna Stein. How are you, Minna?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm, sorry the weekend is over. And I wish summer would come to Washington, but we seem to have entered a period of eternal rain. Either that or I've moved to the state of Washington or the UK or someplace where that's the norm. But it's getting on my nerves. But I know that you guys will soothe that with stories from around the world. Who wants to start us off?
I don't know about soothe you, but inform you, definitely.
Thank you. Well, that's right. That's not our business. It's not to soothe. It's just to offer the cold, hard facts. So why don't you start?
Vance Bolter was arrested near his farm in Green Isle, Minnesota, ending a major manhunt following the fatal shooting of State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband, and a separate attack on Senator John Hoffman and his wife. Authorities say Bolter disguised himself as a police officer and used a fake cruiser to gain access to the victims' homes, where he opened fire while wearing a latex mask. A target list naming other prominent Minnesota Democrats was later found in his abandoned vehicle. Bolter, a former security firm leader with military training, now faces both state and federal charges, while authorities continue investigating whether he received help while evading capture.
Well, this was a hideous crime. We live in a country now where political violence is becoming more common. I think that's because we have a political leader who has made violence an acceptable tactic. That's just an objective analysis. You can look at everything from January 6th through threats of police violence to see that. The Minnesota authorities handled this well. It's a good thing they found him in relatively short order. It's a good thing that the Hoffmans, who I think were shot a total of 17 times, will recover. It's a horrible loss. But for the other couple, as I was driving here to do this, I was listening to somebody on the news going, the last thing we should do is politicize this. And start counting how many right-wing kooks are committing crimes and how many left-wing kooks are committing crimes. We hear this periodically. And I think we need to be objective about this. Several years ago, Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, said violent extremism is the biggest threat we face in the United States. Of course, all the efforts to combat violent extremism have been stopped under this administration. Why do we think that is? Well, that's because the real threats of violent extremism are from right-wing violent extremist groups. There are not many, if any, left-wing violent extremist groups. When the Republicans accuse Antifa of being a violent extremist group, they neglect to mention that it's actually not a group, that it doesn't actually exist. But having said that, if we are going to combat violent extremism, we need our political leaders not to glorify violence. We need them not to pardon violent extremists. We need them not to elevate and celebrate, militia groups. And we need them not to threaten violence as they do. And to suggest, both sides are wrong is absurd. This is grotesquely one-sided. And you want to solve a problem, be honest about it. Riley.
Israel has warned civilians in Tehran to evacuate ahead of planned airstrikes after launching a series of attacks that it says have crippled a third of Iran's missile capabilities and secured aerial dominance over the capital. Iran responded by firing over 370 missiles and drones at Israel, killing at least 5 people and injuring hundreds, while one missile landed near the U.S. consulate in Tel Aviv. The conflict began with Israel's strike on Iran's nuclear infrastructure and top military officials, prompting ongoing retaliation from Iran and fears of a broader regional war.
It's a very complicated story. I think we need to break it down. First of all, the Iranian regime is a bad regime. They've been sponsoring violent terrorists throughout the region and around the world. And stopping those efforts and stopping the threat they pose is in the interests of everybody. It is good news that Hezbollah was decapitated in Lebanon. Good news that the regime that worked with them in Syria is gone. Good news that most of Hamas's leadership is gone. Good news that many in the Houthi leadership are gone. That stabilizes the region. Having said that, I'm not sure that Israel's attack on Tehran at this time, on Iran at this time, is stabilizing. And I say that for several reasons. First of all, if the attack was ostensibly to stop the advances in Iranian nuclear weapons technology, it's unclear that it will do that. We discussed that on our podcast with John Wolfstall the other day. This may set the Iranians back a few months, not much longer than that. The only way to really get to the deeply buried underground facilities they've got it would be for the United States to intervene with the bunker buster technology that only we possess and can deliver. First of all, I'm sure we don't want the United States to intervene, but secondly, that's why people think that this would only set the Iranian nuclear program back a few months. Well, why then would they attack? I think we need to be honest. I think it is much more likely that Bibi Netanyahu launched this attack because he thought that Iran was nearing an agreement with Western countries to have a nuclear deal in place again, rather than because he launched this attack, because he thought Iran had somehow made some stride towards a nuclear weapon. Netanyahu opposed the JCPOA, the deal that we had with Iran under Obama. He sought to have Trump undo the deal. He owns the undoing of the deal as much as Trump does. And he was afraid that there would be some kind of a normalization here. Netanyahu has had Iran in his crosshairs ever since he took office. It is part of his signature position that Iran is the existential threat to Israel. What does not go mentioned typically in that debate, and again, we need to be honest and present this fairly, is that Israel has nuclear weapons. Israel has 90 nuclear weapons. Israel has submarines that can deliver those weapons off the coast of Iran at all times. The advances in Israeli technology have only naturally driven advances in military technology, or the desire to advance military technology in their opponents. Do I think Iran should have a nuclear weapon? No. Do I think Iran should have the anti-Western, anti-Israel, anti-US stance that it has? No. But the question is, will this advance peace in the region? If it decapitates the regime, as Netanyahu says is his goal, there is no guarantee that the regime that follows will be more pro-Western or more pro-Israel. In fact, it seems quite unlikely. There's no guarantee that they'll stop the nuclear program. The nuclear program in Iran started under the Shah, long before the arrival of the Ayatollah Khomeini and the Islamic Republic. So, we need also to understand the history here a little bit. If Israel brings the Iranian economy to its knees, which does seem possible, how will Iran respond? Will it block the Straits of Hormuz? Will it kick oil prices up over $100 a barrel? Will it become hugely inflationary for the world? Will this be a protracted war? Israel hasn't fought a war against a country per se since 1973. That one didn't turn out the way Israel wanted it to. This one is a country with 90 million people. Another possibility is that this war could drag on and on. High Israeli casualties, high Iranian casualties, high instability in the region, high economic instability associated with the war, and potentially incentives for the Iranians to speed up their nuclear program. Do we know how this is going to end? No. I would make one final note. The United States is flirting with getting more involved in this. I don't believe that they were deeply involved with this. I think, in fact, based on what I've heard, that there are a lot of people in the US, including the president, who opposed Israel doing this attack at this point, and the Israelis did it anyway. But having said that, if there's a desire to produce regime change, and if there's a desire to end Iran's nuclear program, and if the Israelis can bring the US government around to offer some help, I think the United States government should condition that help on Israel restoring humanitarian aid to Gaza, getting back on a track to peace in Gaza. Do I think that will be the priority of Trump? No, but if he wants to be seen as a peacemaker, if he wants to get back to the kind of track to deals that he was on at the beginning of his term, he needs to do that. I don't think the United States should help Israel anymore unless it achieves something in exchange for the help it gives. And right now, the most important thing is the story that's getting underreported, which is starvation and suffering in Gaza. That must stop. And we can't just simply switch sides and say, oh, we're all behind Israel because we don't like Iran either, and take the pressure off of them with regard to the horrors in Gaza. Requires the ability to keep several conflicting thoughts in our heads simultaneously. And I encourage all of you to do that. Riley? Minna? Somebody?
I've got the next one.
One of the many of you who are participating in this.
President Donald Trump announced plans to expand deportation efforts in major cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, citing recent protests and vowing to use all available federal resources. His administration has deployed National Guard troops and Marines to cities like Los Angeles, despite opposition from state leaders, arguing the move is unnecessary to maintain order. Meanwhile, immigration raids have reportedly paused in industries like farming and hospitality, suggesting a shift in enforcement priorities, even as Trump pushes ahead with aggressive immigration policies.
Well, let's take those in reverse order. First of all, this desire to stop, immigration raids in agriculture and hospitality businesses because some CEOs of businesses in that area and some Congress people who work with those people have put pressure on Trump to do so, is cynical. It's Trump saying, well, I don't really care about the immigrants. I don't care about people. I care about CEOs. He's viewing these immigrants, like, slave owners viewed the slaves. They're as economic tools. And he's saying, well, okay, if you need this for your business, we'll pull back a little bit. That's ugly. Having said that, the president's Truth Social post, or whatever the social media post was last night, saying he was going to target Democratic cities because Democrats were evil and they were the ones who are bringing all these immigrants into our country and this, and so forth. First of all, is grotesque. It's almost certainly illegal. You can't target regions of the country because of their political beliefs. But it goes past that. This is an effort essentially to criminalize being a Democrat. And if you look at what the administration has done, it is using all the tools of the federal government to penalize people for holding the views of the opposition party in the United States. If you wrote some thing that was anti-Trump in a social media and you're trying to enter the country, they will stop you, even if you're from friendly, allied countries. If you teach DEI, things they deem as DEI, like real history or the achievements of Black Americans or the achievements of women, they will stop you. They will stop funding for science that aligns with democratic views, or they perceive aligns with democratic views. They will stop funding for things that have to do with climate. They will stop funding for universities that they feel are more leaning towards Democrats. And now they're saying, if you have a Democratic administration, we are going to penalize you. We are going to go in. We're going to arrest people. This is what a police state does. It outlaws the opposition, and he has taken every step other than actually saying it's illegal to be a Democrat that is available to him in the United States government to say, we are going to make you pay for being a Democrat. It's disgusting, and it should scare the crap out of you.
The Trump administration is considering expanding its travel ban to include citizens from 36 additional countries, citing national security concerns outlined in a State Department cable. This follows a recent proclamation that already banned travelers from 12 countries and is part of a broader immigration crackdown during Trump's second term. The internal cable, signed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, cites issues such as poor passport security, lack of cooperation in deportations, and potential terrorist activity as justification for the possible bans. Affected nations have 60 days to address U.S. concerns or risk full or partial entry suspensions.
This is just heinous bullshit. Okay, the last time around, Trump wanted to have a Muslim ban. Look at the countries he picked here. This is a racial ban. This is, let's stop people from brown countries from getting into the United States of America. It is nauseating. Many of these countries are friendly countries. A bunch of them are in the Caribbean. Most of them pose no threat whatsoever. Most of the alleged threats they pose are completely fabricated. This is institutionalized racism from the people who say institutional racism doesn't exist. Minute.
Donald Trump's highly anticipated military parade, marking the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary and coinciding with his birthday, fell flat with a sparse crowd, low energy, and critiques of its high cost and political overtones. While supporters celebrated the show of military force and saw it as a patriotic counter to what they viewed as leftist disrespect, many attendees, both pro and anti-Trump, expressed discomfort with how the event blurred lines between honoring the military and glorifying Trump himself. The event revealed deep national divisions over patriotism, military identity, and political power, leaving the parade more symbolic of polarization than unity.
Look, should we celebrate the Army for its 250 years of defending the country? Yes. Is it a good idea to present people with the history of the Army? Yes, of course it is. Was this parade the way to do it? No. It was a boring parade. It was kind of grotesquely sponsored. Like the UFC was one of the I was watching it and there was like a little ad. This is brought to you by the UFC. It's weird. This is brought to you by Coinbase. It's crazy. But, if you saw the pictures of Trump or Melania or Hegseth or Marco Rubio watching, everybody was bored. They were bored. Trump's speech was boring. And so if you want to honor them, honor them. Do it with some energy. Do it, but this, as you said, this blurred the lines. It was disappointing. It was politicizing. And it's not the big story. The big story is 5 to 6 million Americans turned up in 2,000 cities across the country and said, no kings. No kings in the U.S. since 1776. That's, no, and we're not going to start with one now. That was where the emphasis of the American people was, because they see a real threat. The real threat is not from overseas. The real threat is right here at home. And they said, we're coming out. We're going to be in the street. We're going to stand and be counted. And it was quite moving, quite energetic. It did not have any of the defects, the sort of forced quality that this military display had. So celebrate the Army, and later this year you can celebrate the anniversary of the Navy. You can celebrate the anniversary of the Air Force later this year, and you should. But celebrating Trump's birthday with a parade, a $50 million parade that most people didn't want to go see, that sent a message to the world that was not the message you want to send with such a parade, that made people look at us and say, are we becoming an authoritarian state? No, don't do that. And we shouldn't have done it. But anyway, that's how we're heading into the week. And we've got a lot to look for. We're getting towards the end of June, so there's Supreme Court decisions that are going to be handed down. There's still the battle over the reconciliation bill. We'll see how that advances. We've got a war going on now between Israel and Iran that is actually ratcheting up with each day. We've got the aftermath of the violence in Minnesota. And we have a president who is at the G7 meeting in Canada where nobody likes him. Nobody. He has no friends at that meeting. And I saw a thing on the news this morning that showed what percentage of the G7 countries didn't trust or didn't like Trump. And in every country in the G7 virtually, it was over half. And in Germany, it was 80%. So, he is not elevating America's stock. Speaking of which, by the way, I also saw this morning that Trump media is filing to issue some new cryptocurrencies so that the president can make more. Filing last week showed he made something like $60 million. And I think that's a heavy undercount because a lot of the money went to members of his family last week. So that's what we got this week here's the 16th of June. We hope you'll come back here to the DSR Network for our daily, for our other podcasts. And if you like what we're doing, go to the dsrnetwork.com, click on membership, and help support what we're doing for roughly the cost of, one of those fancy cups of coffee you get a month. Well, just one. And you probably can afford to do both. So please do that. Join us here again tomorrow. Thank you very much.